Chapter 2. The Great Which Descendeth in Shining Wind. After the closing ceremony for Serendia Academy's first term, Elian Hyatt, daughter of Duke Renburgg, hastened back to her dorm room and began to get ready. She would be taking a carriage home that same day. Truthfully, she'd wanted to take her time setting off, but envoys from the Kingdom of Farfolia would be visiting the Duchy in the coming days, and she needed to be there to welcome the visitor. Normally, she would have been unhappy at this turn of events, but this time she was more excited than ever. Because today, Felix would be returning with her. Not only that, he would be staying with her family while he conducted diplomatic business with the representative from Farfolia. "I'll bring the hat I bought the other day. As for my brooch, get the pearl one mother gave me." Her elderly lady-in-waiting, used to such demands, nodded and got out the hat and brooch her lady had requested. After fixing her makeup and hair, Elian stood in front of her full-length mirror and checked herself. She had on a brand new coat and brooch, plus a hat in one of the latest designs. The girl looking back at her in the mirror was so adorable, everyone would want to praise her for her charms. "I'm about to ride in the same carriage as Lord Felix, so my presentation must be perfect." This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make a favorable impression on him. According to her father, Elian's great-uncle, Duke Clockford, had been the one to choose their estate as the setting for the talks with Farfolia. In other words, he'd set the stage for her. "Once we arrive at the Duchy," she thought, "I should bring Felix somewhere. The famous Renburgg orchards would be nice, but I'd also like to show him the gardens at night." Her family's gardens contained special flowers called spirit rests, which absorbed mana. When night fell, they would bloom, releasing all the mana they had accumulated. And when they did, faint particles of light would rise from their petals, making for a fantastic sight. How wonderful it would be to watch it happen side by side with Felix. "I must make full use of our time together." In half a year, Elian would graduate from Serendia Academy. It was her sincere wish to progress her relationship with Felix enough in that time that they could announce their engagement at her graduation party. For that reason, she couldn't afford to pass up this golden opportunity. And if she really needed to, she could force his hand with a little mistake. If, by some small error, yes, an innocent mistake, Felix were to accidentally wander into my bedchamber, naturally, I would never do something as lowly as attempt to seduce him, but if seeing me in my nightclothes were to, say, stir something in him, and then we stayed together until morning, all I'm saying is that it could happen. I wouldn't be the one to tempt him, of course. I must only get him in the proper mood for it. And I can have my lady-in-waiting help me. As Elian's mind wandered through various schemes, her lady-in-waiting called out, "It's almost time, my lady." "Then let's be off," she replied with a smile, and the two of them left the dormitory. Several carriages were lined up in front of Serendia Academy to ferry various students home. Among them, one stood out. It had cutting-edge wheels that dampened vibrations. That one belonged to House Hyatt. She and Felix would be meeting by it. Anyone who saw them get into the same carriage together would start talking about it, and rumors would fly. "So the second prince has chosen Elian to be his betrothed after all," they'd say. "That must be why he's spending his winter break at her family's estate." Hee. "Oh, how good it will feel," she thought. Suppressing the urge to start skipping, she strode forward, just as a carefully raised noble girl ought to. And there, waiting for her before the carriage, was a beautiful prince born to be the center of attention. For some reason, however, he wasn't alone. "Oh, it's the short girl who played Amelia," said the interloper. His words were rude and awfully loud. "That's Miss Elian Hyatt, Dudley." Yes, the rude boy was none other than Glenn Dudley, who had performed alongside her during the Academy Festival's play. Felix, who stood beside him, gently reminded him of her name, and Glenn's face lit up in understanding. "Oh, right," he said. Elian. So what's Elian doing here?" That should have been her question, not his. Why was Glenn, a commoner, speaking with Felix in front of House Hyatt's carriage? And what's more, he was wearing a sharp dark green uniform. Why, that's the uniform of the Magic Corps, is it not? All manner of questions formed in her mind. Felix smiled sweetly and spoke again. Dudley, she's the daughter of Duke Renburgg. Oh, really? I had no idea. Elian was indeed the Duke's daughter, but she was also Felix's second cousin. Despite the loose family connection, she was of noble lineage, and royal blood ran in her veins. To have that fact so casually brushed aside made her nerves start to fray. I have a hard time with aristocratic names, Glenn went on. Wouldn't it make more sense if her name was Elian Renburgg Hyatt or something? Most noble titles are derived from the land the bearer presides over. Oh, is that right? It is. Gotcha. By the way, what does derived mean? If Elian had to listen to any more of this, she'd go crazy. Before her face could stiffen, she hurriedly plastered on a charming smile. Good day to you, Lord Felix, and to you, Lord Dudley. I'm not great with all that formal stuff, so you can just call me Glenn. Since we'll be traveling together for a while, I'd rather we get off to a friendly start. I'm sorry. Traveling together? What does he mean by that? Felix smiled and explained. As a pupil of one of the 7 sages, Dudley here has been assigned to me for my protection during my stay. What? Elian was speechless. Glenn continued, his smile as blinding as the sun. Yep, that's the gist of it. Here's to a good journey. The students around them were certainly paying attention to their group. But this was not the kind of attention Elian wanted. Their stares were not envious but curious. Behind her perfect smile, Elian was ready to scream in frustration. In a carriage where the occupants sat across from one another, Elian's spot would naturally be next to Felix. It was obvious. So why was Glenn sitting next to him, and Elian on the other side? Lord Felix, are you sure you are quite comfortable in that seat? Asked Elian casually, as though she were merely being considerate. Felix responded with a beautiful smile. Of course. And Dudley is my bodyguard, after all. There was nothing she could say to such a sound argument. Darn it, she thought. I was looking forward to accidentally falling into his chest when the carriage bumped, and pretending to doze off and lean against his shoulder. Internally, she was gnashing her teeth. At this point, Glenn seemed to come to a sudden realization and jerked his head up to look at her. Finally figured out what I'm thinking, has he? She thought. Yes, that's right. Now exercise some tact. There's no need to worry, Elian. I can protect you and the prez. I've got you covered. That's not what I meant. Barely swallowing her next words, nobody wants your protection anyway, she offered him a charming smile instead. Why, Lord Glenn, you're so reliable. Why are you wearing that uniform today, if I might ask? Glenn was dressed in the colors of the Magic Corps, but as far as Elian was aware, he wasn't a member of that group. The Corps was a powerful combat force composed of elite mags. From what she'd heard, most of them were high mags. My master used his connections to get me into some Magic Corps training, said Glenn. And they lent me a uniform. Oh, I see. In other words, he was wearing a borrowed uniform because he didn't have any other decent clothes. The outfit stood out less than the Academy's uniform, and it did make him seem more like a bodyguard. Elaine nodded to herself. Hey, just wondering, said Glenn, still beaming merrily. Elian is pretty hard to say, so do you mind if I just call you Ellie? Of course I mind. She was about to say as much, when something occurred to her. If she allowed Glenn to call her by a nickname, then turned to Felix and asked him to do the same, well, that would be a very natural way to get him to call her Ellie, wouldn't it? She directed a vague smile, one that wasn't quite a yes or a no, to Glenn, then shifted her gaze over to Felix. If you don't mind, Lord Felix, you may also. But before she could finish her sentence, Felix's head suddenly drooped. His long blonde eyelashes had fallen, he looked somehow drowsy. Apparently, he hadn't even been listening to her. Instead, he'd been letting the carriage rock him to sleep. Excuse me, Lord Felix. What? Oh, my apologies. I'm a little short on sleep. I've been so excited to go to Renburgg that I didn't get much rest last night. Elian's mood, which had been spiraling, shot back up at the prince's words. I had no idea Lord Felix was so looking forward to coming to my home. That sounded very promising indeed. Savoring the joy rising within her, she modulated her tone to be thoughtful and considerate. Oh, Lord Felix. Please don't force yourself. You may feel free to take a short rest. Thanks. I think I'll take you up on that. Felix put his arm up on the seat's elbow rest, lowered his head onto it, and closed his eyes. Ah, even asleep, he's so handsome, thought Elian. As she stared at him, entranced, Glenn began poking her knee. Do you need something, Lord Glenn? Just staring at the scenery's pretty boring. Want to play a game? I brought a bunch from home just for today. Well, Lord Felix is currently sleeping, so perhaps we shouldn't be too loud. We'll be quiet, then. It'll be fine. Now, look at this coin. Glenn took a coin out of his pocket, tossed it into the air, and caught it with his right hand. Then he held both hands out to her. Which hand has the coin? You're right, of course. Glenn grinned and opened both hands. The coin was in his left hand. Elian's eyes went wide. Wait. What? How? You caught it in your right hand. I saw it just now. Let's do it again. Once more, Glenn tossed the coin and caught it with his right hand. Elian watched it without blinking. The coin had to be in his right hand. It's in your right hand for sure this time, she said. Sorry, wrong again. What? Without meaning to, Elian leaned forward and stared at the coin. Simple parlor tricks like these commonly featured in street performances. But for a sheltered noble girl like Elian, they were a fresh curiosity. That isn't fair. It isn't. You must have used magecraft, right? I didn't chant a word. He was right, he hadn't. Elian pursed her lips in thought as she stared at his hands. One more time, she said. Please do it once more. All right, but this time I'm going to make it a little harder. But I haven't figured out the easy one yet. Felix, dozing with his cheek on his hand, opened one eye slightly and watched Glenn and Elian. He grinned, then closed his eye again. Listening to the two of them was quite entertaining, but for now, he wanted to get a little shut-eye. He'd sacrificed a lot of sleep the previous night to finish his thesis. When I meet Lady Everett, what should we talk about first? Like a boy about to meet his first love, his heart soared in anticipation as he happily drifted off to sleep. That isn't fair. It isn't fair at all. You must have played a trick with the cards. No tricks here. You're just really bad at strategy, Ellie. I'm sure that with more experience, I'd be able to strategize with the best of them. And there we go. I won. No. Glenn and Elian seemed to be neck-deep in a card game now. He was glad to see them having fun. It was a stroke of good luck Dudley came along, he thought. This winter break was shaping up to be much more enjoyable than he'd imagined. The Duchy of Renburgg was located in the southeast of the Kingdom of Riddil in a warm, fertile land of abundant forests and orchards. The Duke's estate was on a hill between one of each, a gorgeous building with white walls. In the stable behind the estate, a man swung a hammer as he fixed a door that had fallen into disrepair. He wore a well-tailored worker's uniform provided by the estate. Because of how warm it was that day, he'd removed the coat and rolled up his sleeves. A tool pouch hung from his belt. Once he'd finished with his work, he opened and closed the wooden door several times. It had been creaking something awful lately, but now it moved without a sound. As a finishing touch, he hung a winter solstice wreath on it and laughed in satisfaction. Waha! That should do it. The man's name was Bartholomeus Ball. He was a former engineer who had forsaken his homeland and spent his time eking out a meager existence doing odd jobs. Once he'd returned his tools to the pouch on his belt, a young maid watching nearby bowed gratefully. I apologize, she said. Leston the butler told me to have it fixed earlier, but I completely forgot." "Hey, no worries. Anything else troubling you, you come to me." Bartholomeus winked at her. The maid bowed several more times, then left. Bartholomeus had recently been hired as a laborer at the Duke's estate. He served as a handyman and was frequently asked to fix things around the property and help with small-scale repairs. In short, he basically did miscellaneous chores. When he'd been living hand-to-mouth prior to landing this position, he'd been doing much the same thing. And now he could earn a stable income for it. He couldn't ask for a better arrangement. Bartholomeus was just leaving the stable, humming a tune to himself, when he saw a man appear from behind a tree. The rather skinny, bearded fellow ran a hand through his ashen hair. He was a servant named Peter Sums. Peter narrowed his eyes in a gentle smile and looked at the stable door Bartholomeus had just fixed. "Handy as ever, Bartholomeus." "Heh. Well, it's about all I'm good for." Bartholomeus flashed an insincere smile and tried to leave. He didn't particularly like this servant. Peter seemed like a kind, laid-back old man, a little over 60. But he was always dishing out bitter criticism, and all without letting his kind mask slip. This time was no different. "It's fine and good to show off in front of the maids," said Peter, "but that one is in love with a young groom." Apparently, Peter had mistakenly assumed Bartholomeus was in love with the young maid from earlier. He must just love spreading rumors. Out of the servants currently at the estate, Peter was a relatively new addition. But he loved gossip and knew a lot about all the other employees' relationships. Bartholomeus flashed the man a light-hearted grin so that he wouldn't misunderstand, then brushed back his black hair. "That's what we call a groundless suspicion, Peter. I already have my heart set on a goddess." He pictured the divine creature who had stolen his heart. Her beautiful, doll-like features and smooth blonde hair. Her maid outfit suited her supple body well, and her breasts were large enough to be noticed even under her apron. Her arms and legs were long and slender, and yet she had held on to him so firmly. He was thinking of the beautiful maid who had saved him on the night of the festival in Corlapton. And he knew exactly who she was, too. That woman, who had controlled the wind so freely without even having to chant, was none other than Monica Everett, the Silent Witch. He wanted nothing more than to see her again, which was why he'd decided to stay in Rhydyl and save up his money. To be honest, he'd been quite flush after receiving a request to make some Serendia Academy uniforms a short while back. But in an attempt to increase his funds ever further, he'd started gambling, leading to his current, all-too-predictable situation. "But my luck's finally turned around. I've found an employer who pays me well, and soon I'll even get to meet the Silent Witch." Starting that day, the second prince would be staying at the estate, and Bartholomeus had heard the Silent Witch herself would be with him as a bodyguard. He figured it must have been karma for all the good deeds he'd done. He was nodding to himself as the middle-aged butler hastened over to him. The man, named Leston, had thin blonde hair with a sprinkle of white in it. He had been riding in the carriage with the Duke on his way back from Serendia Academy's festival when they'd picked up Bartholomeus. He was the Duke's most trusted employee. When they'd met Bartholomeus during their journey, he had been the most reluctant to allow him to repair their carriage. But at the same time, he had thanked him the most politely once it was fixed. Leston was famously strict with his subordinates, and he glared sharply at Bartholomeus and Peter. "Enough slacking. Lady Elian has returned. You are both to get back to your posts." "Oh." Bartholomeus pasted on a smile and narrowed his eyes. Elian was supposed to return alongside the second prince, Felix. But Leston had only announced the young lady's arrival. In other words, for Leston, a longtime employee of the Hyatts, the first priority was Elian, whom he had watched over since she was a child. If anything were to happen to that pampered young lady, we'd all be in a mess of trouble. He silently resolved himself never to make any silly mistakes around her. The high-strung butler then gave Bartholomeus another order. "The Silent Witch will be here soon, so please do one more check of the drawing room." "On it, sir." "I'd be delighted to," exclaimed Bartholomeus, leaning forward a little. "I'll check it real good, I promise." Leston looked a little overwhelmed. He quietly cleared his throat and nodded. I'm pleased you're so enthusiastic. Do be courteous around the young ladies' party. Precisely because Leston was so strict and serious, he was the sort to praise a good work ethic. As Leston's gaze softened, however, Peter's grew increasingly unpleasant. Seeming kind and being kind were two completely different things. Peter might wear a gentle smile, but it only served to mask his envy whenever someone else received a compliment. He probably knew so much gossip precisely because of how much attention he paid to such things. Hoping to avoid any more involvement with this troublesome older servant, Bartholomeus quickly fled the scene. Right now, he needed to focus on how to get close to the silent witch. Felix arrived at Duke Renburgg's estate in the afternoon 3 days after leaving Serendia Academy. Thanks to Glenn, the journey had been quite entertaining. After all, the other boy had Elian, who was always begging for the prince's attention, twisted around his finger the whole time. Thanks to him, Felix had enjoyed himself quite a bit. Phew, we're finally here, said Glenn. I'm so glad I brought all those games to pass the time. Are you still sulking, Ellie? I am most certainly not frustrated that I lost. This is simply one aspect of my studies, learning about the culture of petty townspeople. I am not upset in the slightest. Felix wasn't sure whether Glenn was entertaining Elian or the other way around, but he was glad they were getting along. As they arrived at the estate and disembarked from the carriage, a group of servants greeted them. 2 stepped forward, a middle-aged butler with perfectly combed blonde hair, and a grey-headed elderly servant. We are delighted to have you, Your Royal Highness. And welcome home, Lady Elian. We'll take your things, Your Highness. As Felix casually looked over the 2 servants, he couldn't help feeling he'd seen the grey-haired man somewhere before. I remember your face, he said. Were you previously at my grandfather's estate? The elderly servant's eyes widened in surprise. Panic flashed across his face for a moment, but he quickly calmed himself and gave a servant's formal bow. I am honored you remember me, sir. Indeed I was. My name is Peter Sums, and it is true that I was once employed at Duke Clockford's estate. The Dukes of Clockford and Renburgg were quite close, and it was not uncommon for servants to pass from one house to the other. But Felix was awfully curious about that brief look of panic. Had the man made some sort of mistake while working for Duke Clockford and been sent away? Or was he an informant passing information between the 2 dukes? Either way, he figured it wasn't worth pointing out right now, so he kept his reply short and to the point. Thank you for having me. May I ask if the silent witch has arrived yet? Not yet, I'm afraid. Oh. Peter looked up, seeming to notice something in the sky. Felix, Elian, and Glenn all followed suit. 2 dark figures had appeared against the ashen, overcast skies, a petite woman and a tall man, both astride a staff. The figures traced a large circle in the air, climbing higher and higher until a shining gate appeared above them. Glenn's eyes widened in shock. What? He exclaimed. Wait, it can't be. Felix continued for him and spoke the name of the miracle they were all witnessing. A spirit king summoning. The shining gate opened, and wind blew out from within it, carrying particles of light. This was only a portion of the power belonging to Sheffield, king of the wind spirits. The witch who had brought about the miracle then slowly floated down to the ground, landing along with a black-haired man who appeared to be her servant. She wore a gorgeous robe with gold embroidery and held a staff taller than she was, a length only the 7 sages were permitted to use. Her hood was pulled low over her face, and she wore a veil over her mouth, making it impossible to see her expression. Felix put a hand to his heart, trying to calm himself down, and desperately held back the urge to sigh in admiration. She had appeared wrapped in shining wind, as beautiful as an emissary of the Spirit King himself. And now here she was, the kingdom's hero, and the woman he never stopped pining for. One of the 7 most talented mags in Rhydyll, a sage called the Silent Witch. In order to protect the second prince in her official capacity as the Silent Witch, Monica had to engage in several acts of subterfuge before arriving at Duke Renburgg's estate. First, When leaving Serendia Academy, she'd gotten onto Isabel's carriage as though she were going home with her. Then, at an inn on the way to County Kerbeck, she'd swapped places with a body double Isabel had arranged for. Perhaps they hadn't needed to go so far, but Isabel had insisted they should be thorough, so Monica had gone along with her plans. After parting ways with Isabel, Monica and Nero, whom she'd hidden in her luggage, had set off for the Duchy of Renburgg. But since she'd already travelled partway to Kerbeck, she'd never catch up with Felix using normal modes of transportation. Ryn, Louis's contracted spirit, could have gotten Monica there with wind magic, but she was required to stay with the barrier mage and help defend the capital. So instead, Monica had decided to use flight magecraft. Her skills were rough around the edges, and her takeoffs and landings were still unpredictable. But if she was just flying in a straight line, she could keep it up for a while. "Wow, you've really improved," said Nero, sitting on her shoulder in cat form. He rumbled his throat good-humouredly. Monica kept her eyes forward and nodded. "I realized something. The faster you fly, the easier it is to keep your balance." Back when she was just starting, she would keep her balance by moving her body up and down. But that was no longer necessary, so long as she was flying in a straight line. Her balance wasn't perfect, but when she remembered how she used to cling to her broom and scream for dear life, it was obvious how much she'd grown. Since flight magecraft consumed a lot of mana, Monica had made her way to the Duke's estate little by little, fitting in lots of breaks. Eventually, once she'd reached a forested area, she'd spotted the grand mansion atop a small hill set among the trees and orchards. She'd consulted a map beforehand and was sure she'd arrived at the correct spot. Monica gave herself a quick once-over. She'd changed into her sage robe and hidden her mouth behind a veil, just in case. Her hood was low over her face, too. As long as she didn't accidentally say anything, nobody would ever know who she was. Then Nero, still on her shoulder, seemed to remember something. "Come to think of it, I'm gonna be your attendant for this whole shebang, right?"
Yes.
Monica wouldn't be able to speak during the mission, so Nero was supposed to transform into a human and act as her attendant. If anyone spoke to her, she'd have Nero respond in her stead. What's more, Nero's human form was that of a tall young man, so he'd be easy to hide behind. "That means I should change into human form before we get there, right?" "Yes, I suppose so." But before she could say "I'll take us down for a moment," she felt the back of her staff suddenly get heavier.
Her.
An arm wrapped around her shoulders from behind, and it didn't belong to a cat. That was a man's hand. "Okay, we're all good." In a flash, Nero had transformed into a young man and was now sitting on the staff behind Monica. Instantly, she paled. Wait. I'm not ready to do this with a passenger." Her body tilted to one side, and her staff started wobbling violently up and down. She wasn't experienced enough to compensate for a passenger, especially an adult male. Neru, go back. Go back to being a cat.
Now.
If I have to hold on to you with my paw, I'll be flung right off this stick." "Hi." The staff, now under their combined weight, had started making circles in the sky. If Monica didn't do something, she was going to fall. If she wanted to stay in the sky, she figured she ought to start climbing. And so she set her sights higher and higher. "What the heck are you doing?" Nero shouted. Wah. Forgetting how to land, Monica began to panic. Her first priority was getting safely to the ground. What would she need to achieve that? She thought, and soon she arrived at an answer: carefully controlled wind magecraft. And of all the spells she knew, the one that could control wind the most effectively was. "In the name of Monica Everett, the silent witch and one of the 7 sages, I command this gate to open. The one to summon the king of the wind spirits." If she'd been able to keep calm, she might have come up with any number of simpler strategies. But she was far too flustered for that. And so she cast the most advanced spell in her repertoire. "Come forth from the edge of stillness. Sheffield, king of the wind spirits, woho." She was still too new to flight magecraft to stay properly airborne while casting such a monster spell. So she disengaged her flight and let the shining wind envelop her and Nero and gently set them on the ground. And that was how Monica Everett, the silent witch, wasted an immense amount of mana and skill, simply to touch down in front of Duke Renburgg's estate. Later, those who witnessed it would say that the silent witch had descended from the skies wrapped in the shining wind of the Spirit King himself. A small crowd had formed in front of the Duke's estate. The servants who had come to welcome Felix and Elian were soon joined by others from inside, there to take in the Spirit King summoning, a very rare and grand kind of magecraft. At the front of the crowd was the one Monica had been tasked to protect, Felix Arc-Ridil, the second prince. Disengaging her summoning spell and causing the gate to disappear, Monica hastily steadied the hem of her hood. If anyone saw her face, it would affect her other, top-secret mission. In all honesty, she felt like she'd already exhausted her energy reserves with that little airborne display, but it was only now that her real job would begin. From this point on, she had to protect Felix without him realizing that she and Monica Norton were the same person. Just as she was about to have Nero greet the prince, she saw Felix staring at him, his eyes wide. "Why, he said, clearly shocked. Elian and Glenn looked at him in confusion. Monica did as well. What was he so surprised about? Then Nero grinned. "Oh yeah, I've met you once before, Prince." "What?" Felix's surprise lasted only a few moments. Very quickly, he resumed his elegant, princely demeanor and smiled at Nero. "Good to see you again, Sir Bartholomew Alexander." "Indeed, it is I, Bartholomew Alexander, attendant to the silent witch." Monica thought her heart would leap out of her throat. "Wait. Stop. Give me a moment. What?" She tugged on the sleeve of Nero's robe, and he looked down at her, still grinning. "What's up, master?" She then dragged him over behind the mansion's gate and quietly asked, "Why do you know the prince?" "Huh? Didn't I tell you? It was back when you first started your mission at the school. Remember when that chilly guy lost control in the forest and collapsed?" By chilly guy, Nero meant Cyril Ashley, who used ice magecraft. He must have been referring to the time when Cyril contracted mana poisoning. But that had been right after Monica became a student council member. 3 whole months had passed since then. How could something like this have happened so long ago? Monica was at a loss. Nero, however, seemed completely unbothered. "When I was carrying the chilly guy back to his dorm, I ran into the prince." "Why you never told me that?" She remembered Nero bringing the unconscious Cyril back to the boys' dorm that night. But to think he'd encountered Felix on the way. All he said was that he'd returned Cyril to his dorm. If she'd known that Nero had met Felix in human form, she'd never have made him her attendant like this. "And what's with the name Bartholomew Alexander?" she asked. "Didn't we agree on a completely different alias?" Bartholomew Alexander was the name of the main character in a famous series of adventure novels. Anyone who heard it would know it was fake and start getting suspicious. But Nero didn't see the problem. "Oh, I forgot about that. I mean, I just can't remember the names of people I don't care about, you know? You can't even remember your own alias. What's wrong with Bartholomew Alexander? I'll never forget that." Monica buried her face in her hands and fell to her knees. But Nero continued, unfazed. "It's no big deal, right? Since you started your mission, almost no one has seen me in human form." He was right about that. Aside from her collaborators, the only ones who had seen Monica with Nero while he was in human form were Casey, during her failed attempt to assassinate the prince with a spiral flame, and Bernie, at the chess competition. Here, at least, there was no one who could connect Nero in human form with Monica Norton. "You didn't mention my name when you met the prince 3 months ago, right?" "What? Of course not. Gimme a little more credit, I'm smart." "I'll need you to tell me everything you said to him, later. For now, just act like a serious, hard-working attendant, okay?" Nero puffed out his chest and thumped it. You can leave it to me. Well, now she was worried. Extremely worried. But she couldn't afford to leave Felix and the others waiting in front of the estate, either. Monica pulled her hood down over her eyes, then spurred her nervous, trembling legs to take her back to the others. Once she was standing before Felix, she got down on one knee and placed her staff on the ground. With her right hand atop her staff and her left against her chest, she bowed. This gesture was the highest form of respect a mage could give, and Louis had pounded it into her when she'd first become a sage. But while Monica was doing her best to be polite, Nero remained standing self-importantly to her side. Nero. She glanced up at him in a panic as he began addressing the prince. He was still standing. This is my master, the silent witch. Like her name says, she doesn't talk. So if you've got any questions, you can tell them to me. Everyone present was baffled by her attendant's bold behavior. Your master is kneeling, Felix replied with a strained smile. Are you sure you should be standing? Why would I kneel in front of you? Asked Nero. My master is the silent witch. My rank is higher than your master's. Royalty outranks a sage, you know. I don't really care about royalty. I only kneel before people who are cooler than I am. Nero. Silently, Monica stood up and began punching Nero lightly on the back. You can't be rude to the prince. Seeming to get the message, Nero pursed his lips in dissatisfaction. Monica tried to physically push down his head, but she was too short to reach it. As she tried, Felix giggled, seeming amused. Despite Nero's rudeness, the prince didn't seem angry or displeased in the slightest. This made him seem quite mature. I see, said the prince. Then I shall strive to be someone you want to kneel before. That's the spirit. Do your best. Using unchanted magecraft, Monica whipped up a wind above Nero's head. As it pressed down on him, he grunted and fell to the ground on all fours. I need to apologize to Felix quickly, she thought. Nero's attitude was unheard of. If they were accused of disrespecting royalty, she couldn't even complain. But while Monica panicked, Felix gazed at her, utterly impressed. So that was unchanted magecraft, he murmured. Then he directed an elegant bow at her. I have seen you on numerous occasions at ceremonies, but this is the first time I've been able to greet you directly, Lady Everett. Oh, thank goodness. He's not mad. What a nice person, thought Monica, secretly relieved. Felix looked a little entranced as he offered her a beautiful smile. Softly, he added, so it really was you who saved Cyril in the woods near the academy. Monica desperately fought down the urge to cry out. She had saved Cyril in the woods that day, but Felix wasn't supposed to know about it. No. It's because he ran into Nero, isn't it? How should I react? Felix took the flustered Monica's hand, then lowered his lips to touch it. It is an honor to finally meet you. As he gazed at the silent witch, Felix's cheeks flushed red, and his blue eyes melted in ecstasy. He was like a young man in love. Monica had seen him speaking passionately about the silent witch a few times before, but now that she was the target of that order, she could feel her stomach twisting into knots. As Monica's cheeks twitched behind her veil, Elian spoke up, sounding annoyed. Leston, she said. Please show our guests inside and prepare tea for them. Yes, my lady. The servants reacted quickly to the noble girl's command, and they prompted the group to enter the mansion. Released from Felix's hold, Monica lifted a hand to her heart and tried to calm its incessant beating. She didn't know what to do. She was so nervous, she felt like she was going to throw up. As she tried to muffle her rough breathing, Felix addressed her. Let's be off, Lady Everett. My stomach. There's no way it's gonna last through all this. Clutching her staff to her chest and shrinking into herself, Monica followed the rest of the party inside. Hey, don't leave me behind. I'm too cool to be ignored, complained Nero as he scrambled to his feet and chased after them.